Sorry, I can't get my words out this morning, but I just wanted to say a big warm welcome to everyone to this session on open data, the next 10 years. I've just got a little bit of housekeeping that I'm just going to cover before I go into full introduction. So as you can see, we're in a Teams meeting this morning. As you've joined us, you will be muted and your camera will be switched off as well. We've had the chat on to begin with, but we will be disabling that throughout the presentations this morning. That's not to say we don't want you to interact with us. We do welcome questions, and just at the top of the screen there's a Q&A tool that you can use to submit questions to the panel this morning. We've got a full panel of speakers today. We've got 5 speakers who are joining us. Everyone's going to speak for about 15 minutes. Then we'll have a couple of questions, and then at the end of the panel, we'll welcome questions to all members who've spoken. So hopefully that gives you a good outline of what to expect over the next couple of hours this morning. So I will move on to the full introduction then. So as I say, thank you for joining us this morning on Open Access Week. You join us at the end of the week, which has been a full programme of events here at the University of Aberdeen. I'm delighted to be able to chair this panel today on open data the next 10 years. I'll introduce myself. I'm Susan Halfpenny and I work here at the University of Aberdeen as Head of Research and Learning Information Services. So it's really great to be able to join you all today and to hear from the wonderful speakers that we're going to hear from over the next 2 hours. The session today we've chosen to be deliberately broad and quite wide-ranging so that we can really engage in a rich discussion about how things are right now with open data and open research, and what the challenges and opportunities are for us in this area as we move forward over the next 10 years. So we've set quite a high bar for our speakers this morning, no pressure there, 15 minutes to give us that idea of what's going to happen over the next 10 years. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker then, who is Mark Hannell. So Mark, if you'd like to turn on your camera and start to share your screen again, that would be great. So I'll just do a brief introduction to Mark. So Mark is a passionate advocate of open research and its potential to revolutionise the research community. He started Figshare, which is an open access repository while completing his PhD. So I'll hand over to Mark now, who can tell us a bit more about the Figshare platform.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. As mentioned, I'll try and get through some big concepts in 15 minutes. We have a lot of good talks after me, so hopefully I can set the scene. Apologies if I talk too fast. As mentioned, I'm from Figshare. For those who don't know, Figshare, we build repositories. We build data repositories for organizations around the world. And when we talk about what different players in the space do, we're very much focused on the tech, right? We build what I call the sexy term for our developers is policy compliant infrastructure, right? So for researchers, you don't really care about this. This is just the boring stuff in the back end. But at the same time, it makes sure that if you publish a data set, it ends up in, say, Google dataset search. So, all of the plumbing in the back end. And it's great that the title of the session is talking about the next 10 years of open data, because Figshare is 10 this year. So I've done a lot of looking back over the last 10 years and looking forward towards the next 10 years of what open data could look like. And I've been thinking a lot about when we started, what were the predictions? What was the future casting of what will happen in academia? And one of the things that was out at the time was this idea of a fourth paradigm of research. This idea that in the future we will work hand in hand with the machines. The human brain can only process so much data, so many papers. If you're reading papers, there's only so many you can read and process. And so if we sprinkle some AI and machine learning in there, can we use the machines to do all the processing of information and then the humans and the researchers who have that subject expertise can elucidate some kind of wisdom and knowledge within the trends. And so there was a gentleman called Jim Gray who said that in order to move to this next paradigm of data-intensive research, we need a world in which all of the science literature is online and all of the science data is online and they interoperate with each other. So if we look at the science papers, we've in the last, oops, sorry, just clicked the wrong button. 1 second, stand by. There we go. If we see papers in the last 10 years, we've seen this. This is some data from a sister organization of ours called Dimensions. We see that the number of open access papers published each year passed the number of closed access papers published each year in 2019. So this has been going on since the 1980s. So I think this trend will continue. You see a lot of funder mandates, a lot of policies saying, we will have to make your publications openly available. So I don't think we'll ever get to 100% open access, but I think we'll get to, 95% open access publications. And what we will then see is as good as we can, all of the papers are openly available on the internet. So in the data space particularly, there is a growing push that you may be aware of, but it's a new growing push. 10 years ago, open academic data wasn't really happening other than in some obvious areas like GenBank for genomics data, or PDB for the protein data bank, or astrophysics, right? But not for the majority of academic research. But this is starting to change. We saw in this year, we saw what Nature publication called a seismic mandate. So this is the National Institute of Health, it's the biggest funder of biomedical research in the world. And they, as of January 2023, if you are funded by the NIH, you have to make your data available when you publish your paper. What's really cool about this is the NIH have put some money behind this, and the general rule is if there is a subject-specific repository, make your data available there. If there is no subject-specific repository for your research, use either your institutional data repository or a thematic repository if there is one. And otherwise, if there's nowhere else to go, make your data available in a generalist repository. And what the NIH have done is they've taken the key generalist repositories around the world and funded them in a way to make them work together towards interoperability of metadata, interoperability of metrics. I personally am on the Open Metrics. I'm the co-chair of the Open Metrics subcommittee. And what's great about that is when people ask, why should I make my data available? How, you can tell me to do something, but how are you going to motivate the researchers to want to share their data? And as I said, if you're funded by the NIH in January, you're going to have to. But they're also looking at ways in which they can reward you for doing so. And we know we're familiar with the rewards set up with papers. There is citations. I've got a H index. There's some prestige in where people publish. Obviously, my own personal take on that is academic research is the impact of academic research should be independent of where it's published, but we can't hide from the idea that we know if you get published in Nature, it's going to be good for your career. So the open metrics idea is this idea that if all generalist repositories have a same standard of how you give credit and track impact metrics for data, we'll be able to the funders will be able to reward you for making your data openly available in the future. The NIH is not the first. If you look at, and this is a global push, if you look at the EPSRC in the UK, they had a data mandate in 2015, and the JISC-funded project Sherpa Juliet actually shows now that 52 funders globally require data archiving as a condition of funding, and a further 34 encourage it. So this is showing you that it's a global thing. It's happening everywhere. Again, on the plus side, we have enough data in the last 10 years to start looking at what the effect of publishing data is. This is my favorite one, might come up a few times today. So this was on 500,000 papers, and it said that if you publish your paper and you make a data set available in a repository like Figshare or somewhere else, then it is associated with a 25% increase in citations to the paper. And we can understand that it's more reproducible, it's more transparent, it's more reusable. So that's a good motivator for researchers. So thinking about what researchers are saying, every year for the last 7 years, Figshare has run in collaboration with Springer Nature something called the State of Open Data, which is asking researchers why they would or wouldn't make their data available. And we can track this over time and look at trends and see what's happening. So this year, we've just released the report. If you Google State of Open Data, you'll find it. We find that when researchers are looking for help in making their data available, we asked, who would you go to for help? So 41% said they rely on the publishers, and 38% said they rely on their own institution, research officers, peers, librarians. And this is interesting because it's kind of the same number, a little bit more from publishers. But I think people are used to going to publishers for disseminating their research, right? So why wouldn't they go to publishers for disseminating their data sets too? And what's actually happening is a lot of organizations have their own data repositories. A lot of institutions do. So you could go to your library and you could help, and they could help you with publishing your data. A few other snapshots of the report, just because I'm cognizant of time. 72% said if they knew about an internal resource that could help them, they would rely on that internal resource. 67% said if they got more citations to their research papers, that would motivate them to share their data. So that's an encouraging one with the metric I just shared. And 70% said they're already required to follow a policy on data sharing for their most recent piece of research. So as I said, it's not a question of is open data, academic data going to be a thing in the future? It's already here. The question is, how can we make it easier? How can we not add more burden to researchers who already have a lot of stuff to do? And how can we make it useful for them in order to advance their career as well? Encourage good behavior and reward great open data. The problem here is 75% say they receive too little credit for sharing their data openly right now. And this is kind of where we are. There is in this idea of carrots and sticks. As I said, 10 years ago when Figshare started, there wasn't a generalist repository for me to make my data openly available for free. Places like Zenodo didn't exist yet. And so I wanted to share my data to get more credit for all of my research. I wanted to go to postdoc interviews and have more than just the 2 papers I published to show some of my impact. So there's always been that hunger for getting credit for all of the research, but now the other side, the stick side of things, is coming through thick and fast, and pretty much every researcher is having to make their data available as part of their funder policy, as part of their institutional policy, or if you go to publish in, say, Nature or PLOS, you'll be told to make your data openly available. So we know what researchers say. It's very easy to say, oh yeah, open science, open research, open data, that's good for humanity, we should all do it. But when the rubber hits the road, what's actually happening? And a sister organization of ours did a recent report on the state of trust and integrity in research. And they looked at data availability statements in research funded by 5 different funders here. So you've got Bill and Melinda Gates, NIH, Chinese Research Foundation, and a German funder as well. And what they found was, I think this axis here should be shorter, but on the left-hand side graph, you can see that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has gone from about 40% of papers to 50% of papers that have a data availability statement. That's 50% of the papers are saying, within the paper, I have made my data available and you can find it here. And while that's good that it's 50%, they've had strong policies for the last 5 years. More interestingly, maybe, is say this purple line where the NIH has gone from 12% to 40% of papers having a data availability statement. So again, it's already happening. These are all moving up and to the right. When you look at those data availability statements and see where the data is actually published, it's interesting that the majority of them are saying they're in a repository. So this is happening, but good practices are evolving, and we can see it growing over time. So just to wrap up on what's next, in my opinion, and just my opinion, I think the big question at the beginning was, if we can make all of the papers open and all of the data open, can we build on top of it and generate new knowledge? And we're already seeing that. For those who are familiar with AlphaFold, this is a project from Google, from their DeepMind AI company. And so for those familiar with protein folding structures, it's very important in drug discovery. And over the last 50, 60 years, we've used crystallography. It's very expensive. It's very slow. And we'd predicted about 17% of the proteins in the human body. And AlphaFold took all that data. It's very homogeneous from Protein Data Bank. And what they were able to do is overnight, not really overnight, but overnight, they went from 17% to 99% of the proteins. And in the year since then, they've gone from nearly 1 million structures to over 200 million structures. And so for this, they won the $3 million Breakthrough Prize in September. I think they're going to win the Nobel Prize for this as an AI. And this is truly a step change in a research field. So the question is, that's great. How do we replicate this with other areas of research where the files might not be so well described or made openly available, or made openly available in the same place? And so for me, it's all about having these checks. There's a big idea of fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And I think we need to move the space along one initial at a time. And it starts with just findable and accessible. So making your data openly available in a repository and making it findable, giving it good metadata, and having a system where the librarians or someone in your organization can check the metadata is good before making it publicly available, I think is really powerful. We did a pilot with the NIH, and we had people checking their files. And long story short, if you ask people for more metadata, you get more metadata, and subsequently that data is more findable and it gets more views and more downloads. So more impact for the researcher, the better the metadata is. So the future is bright for open data. Hopefully this sets the scene well. I wanted to just iterate one last time that this is, you don't have to read this, but this is saying if we move through findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, obviously the more metadata, the more descriptive information, the better. But I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good here. Just making your data available and linking it to the paper can be useful. It makes it more transparent. The context is often in the paper, and people can read the paper and click through to the data set and understand what it is without having wonderful descriptive metadata. The thing that's great for transparency, that's great for reproducibility in research as it is today. If we want the machines to help us in the future, we really need to describe these files better as independent standalone objects. And so that's what I'd encourage everybody to do. And just to finish with a quote from Jim Gray, who was the author from 10 years ago, the speed at which any given scientific discipline advances will depend on how well its researchers collaborate with each other. I think that's already out of date. I think the idea that if all of the data is openly available, you don't need to collaborate. You don't need to ask permission for other people's data or other people's paper. You can just collaborate by finding the research online. And so we're focused on the tech. There's a lot of work to be done in the people and the culture side of moving the space along. And that's where repositories, libraries, and publishers will help. So that's everything for me. I think I stuck to time, and feel free to reach out to me at any of these places if you have any questions after.
Thanks ever so much for that, Mark. It's great to see that we've got that growing trend of more data being made available openly and sort of engagement from researchers. But as you said at the end, there is still that culture piece that we need to do. And actually, one of the questions that's come through is on that engagement piece. So we've got a question that's about if you have any insights into those researchers or institutions who don't currently share their data and make it available, you know, what those barriers might well be?
Yeah, so as I say, the State of Open Data report, it's openly available. You can just Google it, and you can dig down and you can filter on Scottish respondents and see what they're saying specifically, or UK respondents. And one of the, some of the things we find is it's very new to researchers, right? So researchers don't treat making data available in the same way that they treat making papers available. And so a few questions I always ask is, you know, what do you do with your data? And researchers will say, I don't have any data. I'm in the humanities. We don't have data. And it's, what are the files you're producing and where do they end up? Because everybody's more computational now. And so trying getting on the same terminologies with researchers for different fields is an important one. And then we find that once a researcher has made their data available once, they are comfortable to make it available again and again because they've been through that process. They understand what a license means. Usually that's a big area where they need help. I didn't know what data licensing was back in the day, so it's pretty simple. And the final kind of idea around how to encourage researchers to make their data more descriptive, a lot of researchers will just call it data set or data set for paper, and that doesn't make it findable. And so I always ask kind of like, if you were a YouTube vlogger and you wanted to publish a video, what would you call your video? Would you call it video, or would you give it some nice descriptive title so you get more views and more impact and what have you? So I always encourage researchers to think about it as if they wanted to make their content discoverable. What should they do?
Thank you ever so much for that. And I think it's really key that getting over the first hurdle to do it when it's unknown, it's always scary, but once you've done it once, you know the process and that kind of thing. And that's maybe where, here in support services, we can support researchers along with yourself. So at that point, I am going to thank you again, Mark. There will be more opportunity to ask Mark some questions, but I'm going to move on to our next speaker and just give a quick reminder that you can submit questions throughout all the talks just using the Q&A at the top of the screen. So I'm now going to welcome Hazel Hay to the panel to speak. So Hazel, if you'd like to turn on your camera and share your screen. Welcome, Hazel. I'll just do a brief introduction to Hazel. So Hazel Hay, we're delighted to introduce Hazel today to speak to us about her work as the DORA Implementation Officer here at the University of Aberdeen. This is a new role to Aberdeen, and we're really looking forward to hearing today about the benefits and opportunities that this will offer us. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Hazel.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see the screen okay. So, yes, DORA. So firstly, I'd like to take the opportunity to really thank our colleagues in the library for inviting us to tell you a bit more about DORA today. So as Susan said, I work as the DORA Implementation Officer within the Research Policy team. And here with me today is Marilis Barraclough, who's the Research Policy and Ref Manager. So we'll both be answering any questions you might have. So DORA is an initiative to push for real change in research assessment. And the vision is to advance practical and robust approaches to research assessment globally and across all disciplines. It's worth pointing out that the links between DORA and open data, open access, as I said, DORA is about how research is assessed, and obviously open data is about making the data available. And DORA is trying to move us away from the use of journal impact factors and the obvious push towards high-end journals, which often constrains open access and open data. So both DORA and open data and open access, we're all working together to improve the transparency and integrity of the process and lead to a better and fairer research culture and environment to work in. So the declaration, it was actually developed in 2012 during an annual meeting of the American Society for Cell Biology in San Francisco. And to give it its full title, thankfully there's an abbreviation, it is the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. It's become a global initiative that puts forward recommendations covering all scholarly disciplines and all key stakeholders such as funders, publishers, professional societies, institutions, and researchers. Journal-based metrics are often misused and ill-applied in research assessment. And this often happens at key transition points during a researcher's career, so during the hiring process and promotion process. And the problem with journal impact factors that Dora has highlighted is that it's often skewed. The citations are often skewed. The properties of the journal impact factors are field specific. Journal impact factors can often be manipulated by editorial policy, and the data used to calculate the journal impact factors are neither transparent nor openly available to the public. As you'll see from the slide, there are a number of benefits associated with improving research assessment. So you've got effective and meaningful assessment that will promote all outputs, while focusing on the merits of the work, which will lead to a better and fairer environment. This is similar to the remit of REF, the Research Excellence Framework, where all types of outputs are equal and the use of journal impact factors are not allowed. So the vision of Dora, many people associate Dora with negative thinking, assuming that all the declaration actually says is don't use journal impact factors. But as touched upon, there are clear expectations of what different stakeholders have to do to ensure fair and transparent research assessment. So Dora is a collective effort, and from the beginning, Dora has been a positive enterprise seeking to foster innovation and again, responsible practice and research assessment. Journal impact factors and journal names are frequently misused as a shortcut because they can quickly be applied to sort large volumes of applications. So it's important that we find alternatives to journal impact factors that are efficient in time and intuitive. The Dora initiative has several objectives, as you'll see, to raise awareness and understanding about new tools and processes while ensuring we align with our core values of where we are, to ensure we're consistent and transparent in decision making, to be involved in discussions about new policies and practice, to engage and talk about research reform here and also further afield, and one of the most important, to improve equity in the design of practices. And the approach that the Dora initiative has suggested are varied. Community engagement leads to leading lights having their published blogs, articles and presentations for circulation. Resource development, where the actual Dora initiative site has pulled together articles, guidance and tools from a whole host of sources for use. Partnership, where organisations and individuals come together to work together for real change. Advising, the Dora initiative can provide advice to institutions and funders where needed. And convening, so they're really encouraging in terms of pulling stakeholders together at different events, again, to forward change. Some of the key themes to Dora, there are 18 recommendations in total, and there's themes running through each of them, and these are the main ones. The need to eliminate these journal-based metrics, such as journal impact factors, especially in funding, appointment and promotion considerations. The need to assess research on its own merits rather than on the basis of the journal in which the research is published, and the need to capitalise on the opportunities provided by online publications, such as relaxing unnecessary limits on the number of words, figures, and references in articles, and exploring new indicators of significance and impact. Specifically for institutions and researchers, there is recommendations that they have made. So for institutions, be explicit about the criteria that we use to reach hiring, tenure, and promotion decisions, clearly highlighting, especially for early stage investigators, that the content of a paper is much more important than the publication metrics or the identity of the journal in which it's published. For the purposes of research assessment, consider the value and the impact of all research outputs, including data sets and software, in addition to research publications, and consider a broad range of impact measures and influence that it may have in policy and practice. For researchers, when involved in committees making decisions about funding, hiring, tenure, and promotion, make assessment based on the content rather than the publication metrics. Where appropriate, encourage the site to cite primary literature in which observations are first reported rather than the reviews in order to give credit where credit's due. And use a range of article metrics and indicators, and challenge research assessment practices that rely on inappropriately on journal impact factors, and promote and teach best practice that focuses on the value and influence of the research outputs. So change is happening right across the board. Funders are now paying more attention to research assessments when making decisions, and slowly funders are beginning to change and provide information as to what they expect going forwards. So on the slide, there's a couple of examples. We've got Wellcome now asking for a list of research outputs, contribution to mentorship, output sharing plans, and the plans for public engagement as part of their application process. Cancer Research UK, they ask for a list of research outputs, summary of achievements, and they give a space that you can describe more about your measure of impact, and other funders are likely to follow suit. Publishers, they are also making changes. So PLOS, the Company of Biologists, and EMBO Press are all demonstrating their involvement with DORA. So PLOS have a dedicated page on how its journals comply with DORA. EMBO Press shows citation distributions for its journals, and the Company of Biologists use a number of metrics combined to demonstrate performance. Again, more will come along as the time passes. So DORA has a number of member organisations along with a steering committee, staff, and an advisory board. Some of you that were in the presentations on Monday would have heard Stephen Curry speak, and he's the chair of DORA. What's happening at the university? Well, at the moment, we are working on a number of activities. And as already highlighted in a previous slide, we signed up for DORA in 2020. So at the moment, we're working with our HR colleagues to provide information and guidance for DORA to be embedded in both the recruitment process and the promotions process. Then alongside our colleagues in the library, we are at the draft stage of a responsible use of metrics policy, which will provide a basket of metrics that can be used to assess research. And also we're looking at how we carry out research assessment, in particular in regards to the REF process. Going forward, and looking forward through discussions, policies, statement, guidance, all being produced along with an increased understanding around DORA and things associated with DORA. It will assist in how, as individuals and as a university, we feed into the REF process, but also the wider university research culture. And while doing this, we demonstrate to the wider community we're adopting best practice and we are always striving towards a better research environment. Thank you for listening. If anybody got any questions.
Thank you ever so much for that, Hazel. And it's really interesting to see there's clearly lots of benefits here that we're going to gather from signing up to DORA and encouraging our research community to be involved in that. I think it's really great in terms of what you'd put there in terms of this looking at all research outputs and the impact of that, which really speaks to today's panel. So I was just wondering if you could just, as a first question, if you could just tell us a bit more about what you think the benefits of DORA bring to researchers.
Yeah, thanks. So it's quite varied and quite wide, but it will, we believe, eliminate poor research practice and poor practices in research performance, and it will lead to a fairer and more inclusive research landscape. That's one key element. And it would give clarity on how we do research assessment and how it should be carried out. And inevitably, it then would increase research excellence. And it would eventually lead to widening access to outlets for researchers in general, and I suppose celebrate a researcher's contribution to their different fields. And it's all about making it fairer and open and more transparent. And that can only be a good thing.
Sorry, I couldn't find
That's okay.
then to turn it on, technical, but yeah, like it, it's that encouragement piece. And actually, we've got a question that's come through in the chat as well, which is about sort of the ref guidance, and sort of it makes it clear that researchers can submit outputs beyond journal publications. But here at the University of Aberdeen, maybe we're a bit sort of unwilling to go beyond that, sort of looking at things. So things like software or data can be seen as a bit too risky. So in your role, how do you think we can convince our local leaders that it's strategic to submit a broader range of outputs? And we've got Marlis as well on the screen joining us now.
Well, just I thought I'd better jump in and seeing that I'm the ref manager. Hello everybody, I'm Marlis Baraclough, and I think Susan said in her introduction I was or maybe it was Hazel, the research policy and ref manager. So I look after our ref preparations, and I think you're right. The vast majority of papers that we submit to ref are our journal articles is about 90%, and the remaining 10% are made out of books and book chapters and monographs and all sorts of things. But increasingly, we're seeing a lot more things coming through. So we also submit quite a few compositions, creative writing, websites, software, and we haven't seen a data set yet, although data sets is something that the ref now does actually welcome as a standalone output. We had one in Ref 2014 that how it did, God knows, but it was a very interesting experience, and I think I would just encourage people to think of data sets as standalone research outputs together with all the metadata. They do meet the definition of ref research, and given the amount of work that goes into them, I think it's only fair that they can be submitted and assessed as such. But what I raised my hand for really was just to support what Hazel was saying. We kind of, DORA is a kind of a, we're talking about research assessment in a session about open access, but I think you can't stress enough the links between all of these initiatives that are happening just now. I've been in research support for a very long time now, and I think just the last few years things have been bubbling up and coming to a head, and there's a huge amount of work going on around making the research culture that we all work in a lot more transparent and open, and to clearly articulate expectations and how things are happening, and I think that can only be a good thing. Hazel mentioned that we think that, you know, the implementation of DORA will help with equality and diversity, and I think it will help making science a little bit less of a closed shop where some people know what it's all about and others trying to get in who are not in the club might really struggle. And I think you know, our signing up to DORA really puts a line in the sand saying that we do want that kind of open and fair and transparent research culture at the University of Aberdeen. A lot of other universities have got very similar conversations going on, and we're hearing from Jess Butler later on about research culture, I think. So I think, you know, there's some very clear links about all of these things coming together, making everything accessible, open, transparent, our science robust, and you know, with integrity and reproducible, and also articulating very clearly how we will judge research quality at the University of Aberdeen. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. We do need to move on, but I think there are some really key points that have come through there. That research culture has been something throughout the week that we've come across. So has metrics, and EDI has been as well, and how we can be more inclusive. So it's great to hear that coming up again today on our panel, and hopefully we can return to some of these themes at the end of the discussions. But I'm going to move on now. Say another big thank you to Hazel for her conversation today, and for Marlis for joining us as well. I'm now going to welcome Paula to our panel to deliver the next presentation. So while Paula just sharing her screen, I'll just do a brief introduction. So I'm really delighted to welcome Paula Mazzuzo to our panel today. She will be able to bring us a European perspective, research perspective on our discussion on research data. Based in Belgium, so thank you for joining us today from Belgium. Paula is a data scientist and independent researcher for INGDOR. So that's the Institute for Globally Distributed Open Research and Education. So without further ado, I will hand over now to Paula to deliver her presentation. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my screen well and hear me well. I'm delighted to be here today. I think this is going to be, it has already been a very interesting panel, and it's going to be even more interesting from now on, very diverse. Unfortunately, I don't have predictions on the future of open data to give you, but I definitely have a wish list, at least what I would like to see when I look at the landscape of open data, both academic and non. And what I would like to see, it's everybody moving towards what I like to call a purpose-driven approach. And I hope towards this presentation that I can give you a little bit of a sense of what I mean with that. We have seen already from the first presentation from Mark and Fischer that we are living, it's already started some time ago, the fourth paradigm of science. Some people talk about data-driven science. I like to talk about data-informed science, where indeed humans and machines go hand in hand, helping each other. Either we like it or not, this data-informed science is completely surrounded and lives in a data-informed society. We are surrounded by data. We live with data every day of our life. Yet, even though we live in this era of data abundance, we experience a lot of inequities and a lot of asymmetries when it comes to data access, but not only when it comes to data access. And this is something that it's very well explained in the report that the Open Data Policy Lab from GovLab published a couple of years ago, where they talk about the emergence of a third wave of open data. And I think this is something that goes a little bit hand in hand with the fourth paradigm of science and research that we were talking about before. And what I would like to do in the next couple of slides is really to go through these three different waves that this report talks about, and that somehow we can really see both in academic research around data sharing, but also in data from public institutes and governmental bodies. And so the first wave, if you want to think about it, it's about the need or the right to know. Sometimes when we talk about opening up data, the very first thing that comes to mind is that I need to look at the data if I want to actually first and foremost understand and then also trust whatever it's written in a paper, in a study. And so in that sense, it's very important to have the data if we really want to maximize as much as possible the degree of reproducibility, at least the computational reproducibility of a certain study. And this need or right to know, it's something that it's also implemented with what it's called a FOIA or a FOIA, so a Freedom of Information request, which can be done in many countries in Europe. I've taken here a screenshot from the government page of UK. And basically what this says is that the public authorities on one side are obliged to publish certain information about their activities, but on the other side, it's also the public that has the right to request information for public authorities. And this is a little bit kind of a pulling approach, right? Rather than pushing data out there because of a certain purpose and because of a certain way of doing things. It's really the public that pulls the data when wants to have access to the data. And it made me think in terms of research of what happens, and we've seen it before already in the presentation of Mark, when researchers write in the data availability statement that the data are available upon request, sometimes even upon reasonable request, whatever reasonable might mean in this context. The second wave, it's about a duty to share. So I do publish the data. Why? Simply because I have more and more open data policies and mandates from funders, and sometimes even from journals. So I need to open up the data if I want to get published in a specific venue. And this can be thought, at least in terms of the Italian landscape, in terms of many, let's say, codes and guidelines that are collected. I've selected one here that's called Codice di Amministrazione Digitale. This is a code for digital administration that very simply puts together a set of rules and norms concerning digital rights of Italian citizens. So this code kind of says that indeed the public administration has the duty to share and so it should behave in a certain way. Then to which extent this is actually happening in reality, that's another conversation. And the third wave, it's a wave where we move away from I want to have access to the data because I need it or because I have the right to know, or I want to publish the data because somebody is telling me that I have to, but we publish data with purpose. So we publish data with purpose and we enable their use and reuse with responsibility. And the example or the experience that I would like to share with you today is one that comes from OnData, which is, so as in my introduction, we were saying that I am an independent researcher with ICDOR. I'm a full-time data scientist. I also do quite some volunteering and activism work. Volunteering work, I don't know if that's something that exists, but you know what I mean. I have a lot of volunteering efforts, especially with OnData, which is a non-profit organization in Italy that promotes through knowledge, transparency, sharing and participation, the openness of public data, because we really believe that public data should be treated as common good for everybody, not only in the public administration, but also public data in terms of research data that it's funded via public resources. And the experience that I want to share with you is one of Dati Bene Comune. Dati Bene Comune is an Italian slogan, let's say, that literally means data common goods. And we started a couple of years ago, November 2020, when the pandemic hit the globe and especially Italy in a very, very bad way at the beginning of it all. We started together with ActionAid and the Italian chapter of Transparency International, a campaign where we explicitly asked the government to open up data around the COVID-19 pandemic because the citizens had and still have the right to know and to understand what goes on. And then this campaign at Dati Bene Comune, which has reached a very, very big network and people who have signed and promoted and supported, has become something bigger, something where actually we look around ourselves in Italy, but really not only in Italy. And we realized that a lot of the data that people would like to have access to read, to interpret, and to use and reuse are actually locked up for one reason or another. So yes, there is a lot of data, but there is still a lot of inequities when it comes to actually have access and reuse this data. And one of the things that we did within the campaign of Dati Bene Comune is to prepare 3 reports, which are published also in HTML online. So actually to translate them to English or any other language is pretty straightforward. We did write them in Italian because are reports that we would like to discuss with the governing bodies within Italy. And these are called I dati che vorrei. So that's why I talk about my wish list. These are the data we would like to have, I as an Italian citizen. This dossier, these reports that we published are around the Italy's recovery and resilience plan. So we asked to have access and to actually have control over the data that were funded to Italy in the framework of the Next Generation EU funds for the Europe Recovery Plan, but also data around the gender gap, which is one of the things that Italy mostly suffers from these days, and other 2 dimensions, territorial and generational, which are also very, very important. And the features that this data should have and that we wrote in these reports are the ones that basically are highlighted in the International Open Data Charter, but not only open by default and accessible and usable, but the last 2 points, which are the more important and which are the ones that really reflect and mirror what's the vision behind. We do not ask for this data to be open because we want to play with them and that's it, but because we believe that we can live in a world where the governments collect, share, and use well-governed data to respond to all the challenges that we have to face. And this is also true when it comes to research data. And one of the things that we really bring forward with this campaign and with what we have reported in these documents that I invite you to read and have a look at is that we can't think about opening up data if we don't think about it in an ethical way. And this ethical should be by design. We can't think about publishing data and opening up data and only afterwards ask ourselves, how inclusive are we? How well have we done in terms of indeed that research integrity and trust that we were talking about before. And so in this sense, we get a lot of inspiration from the Ethics Center, which I also recommend that you read. They have this fantastic report on Principle for Good Technology. And a lot of the things that are highlighted here can really be replicated and repurposed for open data. We need to talk about our purpose. Why do we want open data? And the values and the principles behind this need to go hand in hand, and they need to inform all the time the functions. So what are the tools actually that we then bring to the world to open up the data? And this needs to be an intentional process. As I said before, I'm a data scientist. I work with data in every stage of a regular data workflow, from the data collection to the selection, aggregation, analysis, and visualization. And at every step, this ethical by design concept should be in there, also when we open up the data. So what we have written in the I dati che vorrei, it's that sometimes people think about ethical design and ethical data just because of conformity, because you have to, but then again, this is actually not enough. And what needs to happen is really to take an act of courage and perhaps even of rebellion. And in that sense, and this is going towards the last part of my presentation, another approach, another lens that we really try to follow within the OnData organization and the campaigns and the activities that we try to bring forward is the one of data feminism. This is something that not a lot of people are either comfortable or familiar with, but that I personally believe it's really the only way we can bring together opening up data and still make sure that we don't create more power asymmetries and inequities. If it's true that data is power, and I don't think we need to be convinced that data is power, then data feminism is needed to understand how this power can be challenged and how it can be changed for a better future and a better world. There are many principles within the data feminism rainbow, and I don't have the time, obviously, to go through all of them. But the first part, the first and most important perhaps, is the fact that we need to examine power and challenge power. And one of the things that I would like to ask you about is think about the data that we decide to study and to do research on, and the data that actually we should be collecting and we don't. There is also something to be told about that conscious or not conscious choice. And in this sense, I would like you to have a look at the link of the Library of Missing Datasets, which is a GitHub repository, but also an art installation that shows really a drawer full of all the datasets that we really would like to have, but they're not there because they're simply not collected. And that's already a very strong political choice. And another project that On Data has just finished in collaboration with Sheldon Studio, guided by Fight the Stroke, where we have opened up finally all the data about disability condition in Italy. And I really would suggest that you have a look at it. This is also in English and in Italian. It's really a story of liberation of data that can teach us many things. And so just to put the last conclusion, we have talked and we have heard about FAIR. And while I do agree with Mark that we need to, focus on one step at a time, and that FAIR comes in degrees, we shouldn't, it cannot be perfect, and it cannot be perfect altogether. I understand that FAIR data is wonderful data, and I think it's really the way to go. But if we add what I call a pinch of love, I think it's even better. And so to talk about FAIR data, especially fundable and accessible in terms of technical infrastructure, is not enough. What I would like to see for the next 10 years when we talk about open data is really to always keep in mind the collective benefit, the authority to control, so who has actually control to this data, responsibility and ethics, which, as I said before, cannot come as an afterthought, but really need to be a conscious choice in whatever it is we're trying to build. And so I hope I have convinced you, if you didn't know this already, that open data is definitely an enabler. It's a community builder. It's one of the most powerful and the most precious things we have as communities. And I agree with Mark that the future of open data is definitely bright. And with this, I thank you very much for having me again. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you ever so much, Paola, for that really inspiring presentation there, and it's really great to hear about the work that you've been doing to open up research data to citizens and enable them to engage with it. So if I may, I wanted to ask a question about that, really, about, in terms of moving more to that push approach so that the data is accessible to all. Have you come across strategies that work in terms of being able to enable citizens then to engage with that data in a meaningful way?
This might sound trivial, but the strategy is indeed the purpose. If you find a group of people that needs to have a look at the data because of a physical need, because of a mental need, because of a need in their life, usually that purpose is really the enabler. For example, what we did with Fight the Stroke on the Disabled Data Project, On Data has helped in, let's say, setting this data free and finally making them accessible in dashboard, in open data, in FAIR data, because Fight the Stroke really has the purpose and the need to understand disability and the disability landscape. So it might sound perhaps really too simple and trivial, but if there is something that is represented with data and it's close to your heart, that's when people are enabled and they really engage in doing that, because they need the data. They really need them.
Yeah, so I think that identifying the need and really engaging with the community to think about what the research question is, what the data is, what they're lacking. I think that, that's really powerful in terms of empowering that citizen science area. I have got another question that's come through from the audience as well, if I may ask as well. So we've got a question about obviously the brilliant work that you're doing in Italy in terms of the repositories and open data champions. But we wondered the questions about what are you doing to reach out to other institutions beyond Italy on an international level?
We would very much like to do that, but sometimes we struggle already in mapping the Italian landscape and territory. You know, it's a big country. There are a lot of differences between the north and the south of it. As I said before, there is a territorial gap that we're also interested in. So I would say that we do have a network that tries to push some of our best practices abroad, but not at the full capacity that we would like to, simply because sometimes we lack the resources to do that. But obviously, you know, what Mark said before, if everything is open and it's out there, this mechanism of collaborating doesn't need to be, sometimes it comes by default. So if there are also brilliant minds out there, for example, in Scotland, and you would like to talk to us, please come forward.
That's excellent. Thank you. And actually, you've given us lots of further reading and food for thought today anyway in the presentation that people can go away and engage with.
Yes.
So there will be more opportunity to ask Paola some questions at the end, but I just want to, at this point, say massive thank you for your inspiring presentation today.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to move on to our next speaker then. So I would like to welcome Ian Watt to turn on his camera and present his screen. Welcome, Ian.
Good morning. Yeah.
Morning.
Let me just.
While Ian's just setting up his screen, I'll just do a brief introduction. So Ian is an open data advocate, data scientist, and co-founder of the Code the City, which is a civic hacking, can't seem to get that word out today, initiative with regular events taking place here in Aberdeen. He's got lots of practical experience in the field, and we're really delighted that he can join us today. So I will now hand over to Mark for his presentation.
Can I just check, Susan, that you can actually see my first slide there?
I've got your Teams view at the moment, so if you want to toggle to your presenter view.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah, that's excellent. I can see that now.
Great, thank you. Oh, well, good morning, everyone. And I think we're going to find a number of commonalities between Paola's presentation and her content and what I'm going to say this morning. So as Susan said, I'm a co-founder of Code the City, which is an organisation based in Aberdeen, which uses tech and data for civic good. I'm also going to speak about opendata.scot, which is a project that came out of that, and I'll say a little bit about that in a second. So let's start with what is open data, because we've had quite a bit of discussion about the benefits and so on. Open data is data that can be freely used, reused, redistributed by anyone, subject only at most to the requirements of an attribute and share alike conditions. So that really looks at access, format, machine readability, and open licenses. And today I'm going to focus mainly on open government data, similar, I think, to what Paola was saying. And we've had a long and quite turbulent engagement with the data, open data in Scotland. So why do we release data? So there is a legislative or policy or strategy commitment, for instance, from Scottish Government, but we also have things like the G8 Open Data Charter, the 2015 Reuse of Public Sector Information Regulations. More recently, Dundee City Council have announced a commitment in December 2021 to open data by default, although ironically, I think their open data portal is actually offline at the moment. But against these things, there are also some solid principles about openness and transparency and trust, you know, about better provision through data reuse and efficiencies, where you can see where one source of the truth in the data exists, and, you know, the seeds of innovation, as well as some of the wider social benefits, which I think Paola's already touched on. So those benefits of open data, you know, there have been discussed at length in things like the Open Data Handbook and the European Open Data Portal, which go a bit further than those basic things. And different parts of the open data community champion or have interests in different benefit areas or cases. And for example, transparency campaigners may be primarily interested in that aspect of data being released. As Louis Brandeis said in 1914, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So bringing things into the open is a really powerful thing. And these benefits are not unique and they're not singular. So open data publishing will often deliver multiple benefits, as we'll see in a moment. And it's always great to see government data being published, but none of this means much if the data that we want is not there, or if we're publishing data which is not being used. So if we paraphrase The Field of Dreams, the film from 1989, if they build it, they will come, is a sort of approach that's been underpinning some of the government's approach to open data in Scotland for at least the last 7 years, I would say. And there is, my contention is there's little or no engagement with potential data users. There's practically no publicity about data that's published. There's no easy findability or way to find where the data is quite often. And a killer thing for us is there's no single data portal for open data in Scotland. So, you know, it's arguable that people don't use it. And one of the arguments we see is, you know, we publish data, nobody uses it. Why are we wasting money? Stop publishing this and do something else. And we've seen, you know, quite large scale projects such as Glasgow's Smart City programme, going back to about 2013, where they had a £20 million programme, and a large part of the project focused on producing open data. They had I think it was over 300 data sets, and then somebody just switched it off because the project was finished, and all of the data, whether you were relying or not, vanished. And so that data being published sporadically or inconsistently, and often being pulled at the last minute and disappearing without trace, is not conducive to making, you know, good engagement with the data community, who may be trying to build new products or services, apps, or even businesses on it. So if we borrow the 3 U's model from service design, we can think of using open data in a 3-stage process. So the data needs to be useful. So it needs to serve a purpose, to solve a challenge, or to fill a gap or fix something that's broken or missing. This is not to say we just shouldn't publish data by default, but if we are trying to, you know, use limited budgets, then let's think about what are the data that the community needs or would be find useful. And if it's useful, is it usable? You know, are there barriers? Is the data openly licensed? Is it in an easy format to work with? Have good standards been adopted? Is there a low friction for reuse? Are there sign-ups you have to go through, or proprietary formats to be dealt with? Hopefully, there's an agreement between publishers. So for instance, in Scotland, we've got 32 local authorities, and there is very little coordination between those local authorities about the standard of, or even which data is published, which means it's very challenging for somebody to try and use data across different publishers. And is it sustained for the long term, going back to that Glasgow example, and Edinburgh had a similar one as well. But if we get these things right, then in theory the data should be used. And it's worth remembering that most citizens won't actually seek the raw data. They will seek the services that others will seek to build on the data. But that data intermediary, the person who builds that new thing for them, needs the raw data to work with. The usefulness has to be established by the data users, not the data providers. So the providers need to be engaging with the potential users. But before we move on to that thing, I think there's one question, and that is around findability. So we've heard about FAIR this morning, and in Scotland we have had a particular challenge around findability. Question, I think, hypothetically, is does findability fall under the usable or the used part of this 3-stage model? Because in Scotland, we have campaigned for a long time to have a single open data portal for government data, and the Scottish Government have resisted that. And so to address that, in the introduction, it was mentioned that I run our co-founded Code the City, which is as a charity, we use tech and data for civic good. And at some of our events, which I'll come back to in a second, it was identified that this is a recurring problem. And so a group of us, I think initially 3 or 4 of us, got together and decided that we should build something which we've called Open Data Scotland, which is now a live thing. So this is community built and maintained. And this portal, so a screenshot here from the front page of it, uses nice open source CCAN product to, or sorry, JCAN, or I should say, to create a portal for this. And although we know of 179 organisations, so far we're indexing data from 58 separate organisations from 25 different data sources. And we know that there are at least 12 more data sources that we should be adding scrapers for, and that'll be done in with short time. But there should be data from 179 organisations, because all of them have an obligation under Scottish Government's Open Data Strategy 2015 to be publishing data openly by default. But most still produce absolutely nothing, unfortunately. So the site lists the 179, and you can see which of them don't produce data. And you can look at the data that's been published, we can search for it, you can look at it by category or filter it by organisation. And so far, I think the last iteration of this, which is published each Friday, when it refreshes, is we're getting 1,526 data sets across these organisations. And it does some nifty things. So this is a live analysis of data that we expect thematically each local authority in Scotland to be producing. So you can see down the left the authorities, and you can see the total numbers at the right, but you can also see under a sort of red, amber, green categorisation for each theme as well. And if anybody's interested, North Ayrshire, I think, has the best coverage across all of these themes. I couldn't get all 32 on the screen. Interesting, the portal's up for 3 awards at this year's Open UK Award, and that includes Jack Gilmore, who I believe is on this call, listening to what I'm saying. Will probably correct me at the end of it. So, how coming back to the question of engagement, which I spoke about, how should government engagement, if we are going to use that 3 U's model, how should government engagement work? So in order to make that, we need to build the community in Scotland. That means breaking down some of the silos that exist and engaging with the publishers and users without regard to the position in government or outside. So at the moment, there is a divide between government and civic society. And I started in government. I was in 34 years in civil service and local government. But my personal involvement goes back to 2010, when I published the first open data in Scotland that we know about in the government space. And having moved to the civic side, there is a really poor engagement from within government or local government, despite civic society's attempts to make that happen better. So there is a much, and I would contend that there's a much more vibrant and committed and engaged community around data outside the public sector rather than within the public sector. I'm open to challenge on that. So to government, I say, to get your data used, you need to be out there and amongst that civic group. We have got a Slack group. We've got an open the Data Lab, which is one of Scotland's innovation centres. We've got an open data community there, and we also run various events apart from our hack weekends at Code the City, and this includes the Scottish Open Data Conference, which I'll touch on in a second. But there are endless examples from Helsinki and Amsterdam, Barcelona and Berlin, and across the globe that show that most success using open data to citizens' benefit comes from that interaction between government and civic society. I mentioned the Scottish Open Data Unconference. It's coming up next weekend, so just a week away. It's happening in Aberdeen and online, and it's open to anyone to join. It's an unconference. There is no format. There are no speakers. People can come and share information. They can discuss plans. They can get involved in planning campaigns, they can share best practice, they can give examples, but it's a much more laid back than an academic conference, and it actually works really well. So we've had 2 of these online, and we also hosted the UK Open Data Camp in Aberdeen a few years ago, which uses a similar format as well. So I'd encourage anybody who's got any interest in open data to come to the Open Data Conference, whether you can make it in person or whether you can make it online. It's very cheap to attend. In fact, you can get a free ticket if you contact me. We'd be glad to see people participating. I should say at this point that the attendees who are planning to come are probably 90% plus civic society. Very few people from government, unfortunately, despite our reaching out to them. So I'm going to wind up with a summary at the moment and say, publish open data, as we've heard from various speakers today, is a great thing. But to be used, open data needs to be useful, and it used to be usable. The data has to be found, and we can help with that. There is no them and us. Government and civic society should coexist and should support one another. And if you are in the publisher space, whether it's in academia or in government, then I think you need to connect with your data users and encourage the reuse of your data that you're publishing. So work with them, and if you do that, you can have some fun and make some very useful things. I've included some useful links. I'll share the link to the slides later, and obviously I would like you to contact me if any of this is of interest at all. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you ever so much, Ian, for that, local perspective actually on what we're doing. And I love that point of have some fun and make some useful things as well. And that's what we're hoping that we're able to do with sharing data, that it gives people broader access. So I think that was a really great sentiment to end that talk on. One of the things that I was wondering if you could share a bit more insight onto was, in your talk, you talked about the 3 U's, the useful, the usable, the used. But you said the challenges to that were about standardization and sort of the sustainability of the platform. So I just wondered if you'd seen ways that can be improved, or strategies that we can put in place to ensure that we can sustain this, or it is in a more of a standard format that can be reused.
Yeah, I think there are real challenges. So I was looking at, and I haven't got a note in front of me the numbers, but on the opendata.scot platform, you can look at data by format, for instance, and there is, from memory, about 30 different formats being used in government publishing at the moment. And there is little consistency. So there's lots of GIS data being published openly, which is, all of this is really good that's being done, but it does present challenges when we even indexing stuff for the platform itself, and for people to reuse it if you're having to deal with specific GIS data sets compared to, standard CSV or Excel or whatever they are. So I think there's that. There is very poor, in my view, use of metadata in government data publishing at the moment. Some example, exceptions to that, and I think there is, a significant lack of joined upness. So for a while, when I was working in local government, I managed the 7 Cities of Scotland's open data programme called the Data Cluster, and the idea behind that was to get the 7 cities of Scotland, which are the 7 biggest authorities, to prioritise what was needed by the data community and jointly publish them to the same standard format, license, and same thematic pieces of data across those things. So you can think about, use the example of planning data. So every council in Scotland provides the same functions, and so in fact they use the same data systems behind it for all of them as well. But try to get planning data as open data is impossible in Scotland, but it would be such a huge hit if they did that and made it available openly at the same standard across all 32, or even the 7 that you could actually join up as well.
yeah, I think it's, how we can bring across and the data that people want in terms of that planning data. That's what citizens are maybe asking for, of
Sure,
how we
yeah,
can
yeah.
overcome that.
Yeah. But sustainability is a real problem. I mentioned Glasgow. Edinburgh did the same. They built really expensive, large open data portals, and then somebody decided that it would end the project, and the budget had gone, and they'd switch it off. And there was no backup of it unless people had taken copies of the open data. All of that vanished, and that is not a way to proceed, because it's a large use of public money, and then it vanishes, and there's no sustained benefit beyond the immediate.
And I'm sure, yeah, that kind of sustainability, the legacy data, I think that's something that resonates both with the local council area as well as sort of the research community as well. At the end of that grant, how do you sustain that platform? So I'm sure that's something
exactly.
We'll come back to when we come back to comments, but I do need to move on now. But I just wanted to say another big thank you to Ian for that really insightful presentation today, giving us that local perspective on open data. So I'm now going to move on to our final speaker today, and I'd like to offer a warm welcome to Jess, who's got her video on now. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to Jess while she gets her slides up to show. So Jess is the co-director and lead analyst for the Network Data Lab here at the University of Aberdeen. She also runs Aberdeen's Open Research Working Group and is a huge advocate of open research. So I'm really pleased to be able to welcome her to deliver the final presentation on this panel today.
So thank you so much. I'm super excited to talk about this. So I'm going to make the case to you that a lot of our research is of a pretty poor quality, and that I think we need all sorts of openness beyond even just open data at the end to improve the quality of research. So I do come at this from a sort of classic hypothesis testing type scenario. So I work for the Centre for Health Data Science here, using Scotland's health data to try to improve health and care. So between the university here and NHS Grampian. So now you say, okay, prove to me that there is a problem with research quality. And I think when I first started thinking about the problems with research that I see, the first thing that maybe if you start worrying about, is our research good enough, your mind might go to fraud. So there are some very juicy cases of fraud, people literally making up data so that they can get promoted, get a big grant, have more stuff on their CV. And I love this, right? So I can recommend Elizabeth Bick on Twitter is excellent about finding fraudulent image manipulation in literally hundreds of academic papers. There's also Retraction Watch is a website that reports retracted papers due to fraud. And it's a bit like a nerd soap opera. So I do completely like watching that. The case I want to make, though, is that while fraud is terrible and we should fight against it, I actually don't care about fraud. I think there's a much bigger problem with the quality of our research, and I think it's systemic. So this is my slide. Whatever field you're in, if you're an academic, whatever field you're interested in, you put the name of that field and reproducibility crisis into Google, and you will find a load of papers. So basically, none of the things we think are cancer drug targets actually work when pharma tries to get them to work in their company. Artificial intelligence, you can't reproduce it. Reproducing something just means, like, if someone else tries it again, can they get it to work? And the answer is no, because actually the results weren't true. So neuroscience, whatever you fancy, psychology, whatever field you're in, you can find evidence that the research we're producing here is of poor quality. I'd highly, highly, highly recommend both of these pop science books for overviews. Rigor mortis will absolutely break your heart about the quality of the data we have on the medications we use across the world every day, and how difficult it is to be confident in some of the results that are published and highly cited. Science fictions takes an even broader view, so talking about all the different problems with the research that is going on, both relatively recent science fictions, I think, from like the last year or two. So highly recommend these. They are depressing, but I think they're interesting. And I think we, especially as advocates, the people on this call, need to have a very tight case we can make to people who don't believe there's a problem. So I think these are great places to start. It's bad enough that the UK Parliament is investigating it right now. So the House of Commons had an inquiry into reproducibility and research integrity here in the UK. There were 80-odd pieces of submitted written evidence and 3 days of oral testimony and evidence giving to the committee. If you really want to nerd out on how bad the quality of some of UK research is and why, that is all publicly available. I'll give you a link to these slides at the end, so anyone's welcome to have the slides here. The committee itself will eventually write a report. It's been almost a year. They haven't written the report yet, and how they suggest the government funds research to improve this quality problem. So it's something to watch out for when you're trying to motivate the people you work with to work at a higher standard. So why, if I had to give a super brief overview, if this is whatever you learned in secondary school, the scientific research cycle, you have a scientific question and you formulate it as a hypothesis, design a study, collect some data, do some statistics and test whether your hypothesis is true, interpret the results and publish it. And basically there's very solid evidence that the way we work is sloppy enough at each stage in this cycle that basically every step needs improvement. Quality control failure at every point in the research cycle. And the single go-to reference I recommend for this is a 2017 paper by Marcus Munafo, A Manifesto for Reproducible Science. We don't need to go through, so here's in red, Munafo et al. Tried to talk about how each step fails. And if I had to summarize it, I would say we collect not enough data to support the conclusions we want to make. We sort of sloppily fish around in the data till we find a statistically significant result, even if that's a false finding, just because we looked so many places. And then we spin it in a journal article because we want a good ref score and we want to get promoted. And we submit it to these academic journals that are essentially magazines that want bold headlines. So I'd much rather write the paper that says drinking red wine extends your lifespan. Do you know? And I find that because I was quite sloppy with some poorly collected, messy diet survey data. And it gets into a good journal with a high impact factor. And so I get a good bunch of ref stars when I get promoted. So there's not a whole lot of incentive to do things properly when the end result of your work is a magazine article with a splashy headline. So Marcus and them walk through all these steps if you wanted to really get into the nitty-gritty of it. And basically, we know how to fix each of these problems. So that paper talks about briefly what you could do at each step. My view on it is transparency, much higher transparency about how we're actually working, openness, solves a lot of these problems. And it goes way, way beyond saying data is available upon request in the journal article that you publish at the end. To me, that is literally meaningless. And there have been studies, I'm sorry, I don't have citations at hand, but people have just gone out and contacted Mark's first slide where he talked about, oh, look, data availability statements are up, 50%. But a third of those data availability statements are, you have to email us and ask. And when you go and ask, they don't actually give you the data. So people have systematically gone through and emailed requesting data and just been ignored. So the openness needs to come way further upstream in the process. So a big one is registering study plans. So before you start fishing around in your sort of messy nutritional data, you have to say what you're going to measure. So I can't look until I find something significant. I have to declare at the beginning, I'm studying red wine in middle-aged women and lifespan, things like that. So I highly recommend the Open Science Foundation's website. They have all sorts of resources for this, keeping everything open in the whole cycle. And they have a point and click, three ticks way to register a study plan and make that plan publicly available, date stamped, before you start your work. The other thing is a lot of time academic papers, because they're written for magazine articles, basically, you have a paragraph about what you did. And in the world of big data, that is not at all sufficient for someone else to reproduce your work. So the way around that is to share the analysis code as well. So how was red wine drinking measured? Did you average it? What kind of average did you use? So these sort of questions aren't normally written up in these magazine articles, But if you make your work reproducible by using analytic code and share that on a site like this or any site you fancy, your institutional repository, that just gives a lot of transparency into the actual methods you used. And it makes it so other people can say, oh, I disagree with how they defined this, or I found an error in how they measured that, in a way that we literally just can't do now. I don't think maybe the average man on the street realizes how little other scientists know about what actually happened when the research went on. So this is a big one for me. There's a huge publication bias. Because these academic magazines want splashy results, they don't accept my manuscript that says, yeah, drinking wine does not extend your lifespan, sorry. Too boring, they say, we're not interested. And so if my results of my analysis show that, I can't get it accepted at any journal. And they call it the file drawer problem, because the data and the study goes to die in the file drawer in your office. So there's a whole lot of pushes for ways to make all results available, including boring results that show there isn't a splashy finding. Preprint servers, the rise of preprint servers during COVID, these are just open websites where you can upload a manuscript to literally anyone. There's no peer review. There's other journals that focus on doing rigorous peer review, but say we don't care whether you found the positive result or not. If it's rigorous, we'll publish it. My favorite type of publication is where the journal agrees before you run the study to publish your work, provided it meets a very high standard of rigor. So they say, we're blind to whether your analysis showed that drinking wine extends life. Because you designed it so beautifully, we guarantee to publish it, and that's called a registered report. This sounds niche, but because our publication record is so incredibly biased, we have to sort of get into the weeds on this sort of open results. Replication is a big one. So we get no reward for trying to reproduce someone else's work. So you say you find wine extends life. I'm going to go see, is that true? Can I use the same data and get it to run? Can I do another study and get that to run? Journals also don't publish this. They say boring, it's already been shown. Especially if I'm disagreeing with someone. If you said it's worth it, you should drink the wine, and my bigger analysis says, nope, there's no significant difference, I can't get that published. So figuring out a way we can support the replication of studies. It's something you might assume goes on, but it absolutely doesn't. You don't get 4 ref stars for a replicated study. The other one is error detection. It's another thing, because we don't make our data open, we don't make our analysis methods open, we don't publish some of the analyses that don't show anything interesting. There's no way to get a promotion in academia by finding errors in other people's work. You could easily get a promotion for that if you worked for, say, NASA or in some sort of large surgical team. You might very much want to reward error detection, but we don't. There's no kudos for doing that in the way our system is set up. So this is a group, a red team market. They actually, you can put into your grant funding money to hire sort of a team to attack your analysis, not your person, your analysis. So the idea that you should be able to ask someone, come in, try to poke holes in this, do you know? It's something that tech companies would do all the time. So this is my big thing. I can make a case that all of this improves science, but if my boss thinks it's a waste of my time, if the journal, which is the only place that determines whether or not I get promoted, getting a good journal article, if they don't care, it's not worth doing. So the idea that we might be rewarded for things like working in a team, evaluating other studies, improving methods, detecting errors, or even sharing data, it's simply not true right now. So if you look at the University of Aberdeen's promotion documents in my institute, they want to know how much grant money you've earned, and they want to know how many 3 or 4 star ref papers you've written, because that determines how much money the university is awarded from the government. There is absolutely no place that wants to know anything about this type of work. So unfortunately, before we get to start working in this better method, I think we have to become sort of activists and let people know, look, there is a big problem. Look, we know how to fix it, but you're not letting us fix it. So I think, unfortunately, that's where people like us are at right now. So if you need some evidence to show your bosses, UKRI, them that fund all of the research in the United Kingdom, did a study, why is our research such poor quality? Reference here at the bottom, came out in 2020. These are the top 5 reasons. They did a number of interventions where they asked people, funders, academics, university administrators. One of them is quite bad. So if you feel bullied or harassed at work, you might do some sloppy research and try to get it published. This should be illegal, right? The other 4 are the way we define how a university works. These are things we put upon ourselves. High workloads, promotion criteria that don't reward rigor, metrics like impact factor, ignoring what Dora says, and fighting to move up league tables rather than fighting to produce excellent research about cancer biology. So we have to look internally to improve these things in the blue so that our research is of better quality. So this is my punchline. We definitely don't need research integrity police. I don't care about fraudsters. This is one problem in a million. It matters much more that my colleagues feel too stressed to be able to work to a higher quality because they know they won't be rewarded. They don't feel safe that they can work to a higher standard. So now you're depressed, and I apologize, but I don't think it's that bad. So there's a whole bunch of people working in this space, including a lot of people at your university already. The same Munafo who wrote the stressful, depressing 2017 paper has an editorial piece, an opinion piece in 2019, talking about how this is a collective action problem and how we have to work together to raise awareness about the methods and how we can improve this. And it's a slow process, right? So these are my 3 baby steps that you can take today without finding it too stressful. I think a big one for people who are junior, who are interested in this stuff, is to make yourself visible. Have a decent website, go onto Twitter, see who's doing these sort of things, just so that you can start to make links with other like-minded people, even if they're not in your immediate team. Find the good eggs that are around here. You get a few talking points, and I call this passing information upwards. The people who run the university are not like evil businessmen. They are literally overwhelmed. They're worried about finances, and they need a few simple fixes. So we make ourselves visible, we find the good people, we have a few little talking points we can feed upwards. And the things that I try to stress here are just have a little bit of institutional knowledge where you are. Has your uni signed Dora? What are your promotion criteria? Let's get them in black and white and make them public. How do you get assessed for rigor for your outputs? Oh, I didn't speak about this much, but UKRI, the big funder in the UK, is changing the way CVs are written to a way that I think is much more conducive to better rigor in papers. And it's something you need to know about locally. And who are making these decisions? And can you chat with them? So these are places to start when you're thinking about open data, open research in a political way, which unfortunately I think we have to do. So I think I just have one more. Places I have found support. So love your librarians. Librarians are battling for-profit publishers every day. They're working and educating people about things like Dora. Find them, love them, and give them the connections to researchers, which they don't have. So the people in the administration might feel like they're doing tick boxes or just shouting at people to do paperwork. They need support from researchers on the ground, people they can collaborate with to improve things. UKRN, the Reproducibility Network, is worth following on Twitter. Glasgow's Lab for Academic Culture is super progressive and great. Riot Science Club has a bunch of talks if you want to learn more about this, and Everything Hurts is a great podcast. I am talking about this on Twitter all the time. It's frankly boring at this point, but I'm always happy to chat in person or on Twitter. And I will pop the link to these slides, which are open license. Use them however you like, into the chat here at the end. So thanks so much.
Thank you ever so much, Jess, for that very honest and actually challenging presentation there. Somewhat of call to action for us all as well at the as we go on into this. And I think, you know, it resonates, doesn't it, with lots of the conversations that we've had so far, and that research culture is so tied up in that research quality and what we're able to do. So I have got a question here from the audience that's about, do you therefore think we need to radically rethink what we mean by research excellence and reward that instead, really? And what do you think the role of funders is in all of this?
Yeah, so I've thought about it a lot, and I do think that we can push from below, but change only happens when ref gets, the only thing that drives anything is ref. Let's be super, super, super frank. Everyone's stressed about money and they want, to make sure the university is well funded. So yeah, in my opinion, if we, the simplest thing would be to cut down on the volume. So 80% of the publications in my school, the medical school in Forester Hill, were not considered refable. So weren't considered as contributing to the university's ability to generate money from the government. That's a waste of time, right? So how can we slow down the rate of output a bit, improve what we're putting out, higher quality? We need to ask for more transparency about how rigor is evaluated for RAF. And for me, a big one, a big one, is right now we reward individuals. Jess has a 4-star REF paper, give her a promotion. I did not write that paper by myself. It's a massive team. There's 10 people on the immediate team plus all the university support. So if you start to support teams, then we could have someone on the team whose job it is to try to poke holes in my analysis. Right now, we simply can't do it. Everyone's working for themselves, just trying to generate papers really quickly so they don't get fired, basically. It's not a way to have reliable research. That's not how I want my cancer drugs designed, And it's scary to me to think that you might be better off going to a big for-profit company because at least they have money on the line and they want the drug to work. It's a bit terrifying.
Yeah, that is a bit terrifying, but no, I think that's really key, and there is a growing debate in terms of that individual versus the team, and ensuring that everyone is acknowledged for their input in research. So I think that's something, advocating that and pushing towards that we do look at the team, and that provides us, and maybe sometimes a little bit slowing down, because what we'll always find is like barriers to this is time and workload and that kind of thing. So maybe sometimes we do need to take a breath. So I want to say a massive thank you to Jess for her inspiring talk today, and I'm going to now invite the rest of the panel back to join Jess and I, so that we can move to some of the questions that have come through and some of the broader considerations. So a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. Just checking everyone's back on the screen. So I think, there's been some key themes that have come out throughout the talk about research culture, about sort of being able, the metrics idea about EDI and how we can make our research more accessible. There have been some things that have come up as the barriers as well. So I've got a question here in the chat that I'm going to pose to the panel, and it's really around the unintended uses of data. So the question is looking at that. Sometimes we can be fearful of releasing our data to the world because we don't know how people are going to react to that and the unintended results and purposes. But also that it may be something that we're worrying about that isn't really a concern. So I wondered if people would like to, if anyone's got a response on that in terms of how maybe we persuade the people to engage or overcome that barrier. So I can see Mark's got his hand up, so I'll go first to Mark.
I just wanted to, I don't know if it's a full answer to your question, but the idea that we do the State of Open Data report every year, and the biggest concern from researchers is misuse of data, and we actually saw a bigger uptake post-COVID. And I think it's this, fake news, misinterpretation, whatever. There's two things. There's one, that there's this idea that everything should be as open as possible, as closed as necessary. There's some data that should never be made publicly available. If you have you're publishing the geo coordinates of an at-risk species, they're probably at risk due to poachers, you shouldn't be making that data available. So there are ways to have restricted access to content. But then if we're thinking about the reasons why researchers don't want to make their data available is because it might be misused, I think we need to focus on this fast, open, good triumvirate of what researchers want from research. They want it to be fast, they want it to be open, and they want it to be good. And for every area where we don't have all three of those, nowhere has all three of those, we need to focus on what we need to do to improve it. So Peer-reviewed articles, largely open now. Good, they've had peer review, not necessarily fast. So we need to work on ways in which we can speed up that process. Preprints, open, fast, not necessarily good. Data falls into that space as well. So that's why I think we need humans in the machine to check the data before it goes live. But to go back to what are the actual, having worked in this space for 10 years, how many people actually have their data misinterpreted? You're lucky if anyone's looking at your data to interpret it other than people who are reading the paper. So it's not necessarily a concern that we see. It's a concern. It's not necessarily a justified concern.
Thanks for that, Mark. And I'm going to draw on Paula now to respond as well.
Yeah, I just want to say that I second entirely what Mark is saying. I don't think it's something that should be put forward as a major concern, because there are indeed ways of not opening everything up if that is more dangerous than closing things down, obviously. And another thing that I would like to add to this point is that I also hear sometimes people saying, I don't want to open my data, not because people will misuse or misinterpret, but because it might not be correct. There might be some mistakes in there, and this goes for data sets as we know them, but also special analysis code and things like that. So this goes a little bit back with what Jessica was saying before. I think we also need to work towards make it okay again to be human and make mistakes. Honest mistakes can happen. And if it's true that science has a way of correcting itself in years, honest mistakes are okay. And I think this is something that goes back into that transformation of research culture and also pressure that we put too much on our researchers.
It's great. Has anyone else got a response? Oh, Ian, at that point.
Make him unmute myself. Yeah, I mean, from my days working in local government, we had a real problem, largely as Paula was saying, about people saying our data is not accurate enough to publish. And to which my response was often, well, how do you manage to run your services if it's that inaccurate? And so I used to try and encourage them to adopt the sort of Linus Torvalds many eyes approach. You know, I think he said, many eyes make bugs shallow. And so if you've only got a team of 2 people working on your GIS data and you're concerned about the quality of it, why not get it out there with a caveat and say, you know, we've got this, we know there are some small issues here. If you spot one, tell us and we will fix it immediately. Now that only works for non-critical data and non-personal data, but I think it's really important that if the barriers to getting the data published are that we think of this data set of 500,000 records and 4 or 5 of them are possibly a little bit suspicious, you need to work a way to do that and not use that as a barrier to not publish.
Yeah, I think, like encouraging that, being able to work with people. And we've talked a lot today about engagement, about how we can facilitate and champion and advocate open data. Things that have come out, as I've mentioned, has been how can we improve research culture? How can we change how we're using metrics? How can we look at how we're defining quality? But also with that drive to enabling that openness to research data. So what I'd like to go around now, if I may, and ask each of the people who've been on the panel and spoken is, we've got, over 50 people on this call now. We've had over 60 at some point. So I would like to set you a challenge of what do you think we can do? One thing that we can each do that you think would really improve the situation, whether that be with the metrics, the research culture, the quality, or that enabling openness. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to go round my screen. So it's actually, Jess, you're first on my screen, so I will ask you that question first.
So my big worry is there's a whole bunch of people in roles like yours, Susan, who know the right thing, I think, and know how to do it and won't be listened to by like the macho lab leader, who's running a huge cell biology lab on the other campus and who's bringing in millions of pounds per year. And he's been very successful, working fast, flashy, do you know? So I think we need to recognize that all the, oh, it's the right thing to do isn't going to get us anywhere. And it is a political problem. And you almost need to convince the people who have some influence over that guy and people like him. And no, you probably can't convince that guy, but Marlis runs ref for the university. Might be nice to bend her ear about how is rigor evaluated internally? Can we actually submit these data sets? This guy says we can't. And so I think it's a political problem, unfortunately. So I think we have to stick together, have strong talking points and like business cases about why it's better to work this way. So I always say UKRI has a new way of funding. UKRI's REF is going to focus on research culture in the next. What is our evidence? Do you know, impact instead of citations, things like that. So I think we need to be pretty savvy politically.
That's great. So that be political and influence up in terms of what we can do. As Marlis got a name check there, I'll move on to Marlis for your reflection.
Yeah, I think my action point is maybe trying to buy Jess a cup of coffee and convince her I'm not the enemy. No, I totally agree with what you're saying, Jess. You know, there has to be a massive rethink, not just about scientific rigor, but also what we think of research in terms of research excellence more broadly. What makes a good research environment? I mean, it's telling that the only measures that the REF has used in the past to describe the research environment is research income, the number of doctoral degrees that you award, which is kind of pretty poor if you think about it. And that, you know, and the other thing I kind of always think is that, you know, this is a much broader ecosystem than just the university. So we can try and do the right thing. And I think with our research culture task and finish group and lots of other groups, we are thinking about research environment. We have learned the hard way that having a poor research environment does not make for very good quality. And we're living with the funding cuts that has brought about. But I think we also need to recognize that this is part of a bigger ecosystem, and we need to lean on our very senior people to make sure that they get that message out as well and say, we cannot do this. If research funders only reward one type of research, then universities cannot afford to ignore that. So we need to convince the research funders to rethink their idea of excellence as well, and say we need different types of research excellence that needs to be rewarded through the funding streams. Because at the moment, they set the tone and we follow, and I think we must try to do what we can to change the tone of what the funders do as well.
Great, thanks, Marlis. And with that broader ecosystem and the various influences that we need to do, I'm going to move now to Paula to see what her reflections are on what we can do.
It's a $1 million question. If I had a solution, I wouldn't be sitting here. I would have already done it somehow. I think Jessica said it all. It's a matter of political choices. There are two things that come to my mind. One is we need to educate ourselves. It's already important that we occupy these spaces and that we listen about this. We are here trying to, you know, teach each other, inspire each other about what is wrong and possible or not possible ways to change things. As I say this, I look over my living room and I see the science fiction actually book standing there on the surface of a pile of books. So, for example, reading that book has opened my eyes already some years ago in whatever is wrong with the way we do research. So educate ourselves. And another one would be, and but this goes back to those, let's say, maybe older generation PIs and professors and group leaders. We need to stop pretending that we care about the wrong things. There's the study that some time ago showed that when you ask, for example, about the journal impact factor, how much important it is for people when they evaluate their own research and the research of their peers, they care very little for their own research. They care a lot about how much it says about other people's research. So let's just stop pretending we care about the wrong stuff. We have kept it up for too many decades.
Thanks, Paula. So that's the educate and let's consider what we care about and we measure. So with that measurement idea, I will move on to Hazel, if you'd like to share your reflection. I couldn't hear you then. Is your mic up? I'll just, at this point then, while Hazel just plays with her sound, I will move on to Ian to pick up maybe on the point about that education side and your reflections really from today.
Yeah, I mean, what we should all do, you might expect me to say this given one of my latter slides. So if you're in Aberdeen or anywhere else, actually, come to SCODE, the Scottish Open Data Unconference. It's available online. We want to have a bigger conversation with data providers, data users. We want people to understand the art of the possible and what the challenges are. So, you know, if you're not able to do that, certainly have those conversations, expand your network, find where the experts are, and get involved in outside your current bubble. And if you're able to code, then get involved in the Scottish Open Data Scotland portal, because actually it's a community curated thing. I forget how many people we have contributing to it, but it's a large number now of pull requests, so it's all on GitHub. So yeah, two things: come to Scottish Open Data Conference and get involved in helping us with the Open Data Scotland website.
Yeah, so get involved after this, and I'm just going to go to Mark now for his reflections from what we can do.
Yep, I would just say if you are a researcher at the University of Aberdeen, start making your data available. The message that needs to come across, and I'd say this to anybody, is you're going to have to do it. It's going to be a part of the research process going forward. If you start making your data available earlier, you will have had more impact than your peers who start doing it in a year when they're forced to. So for your own career, it's a good thing to do. For the University of Aberdeen and people who work there writ large, encourage your university to start thinking about it if they do care about rankings, because at some point in the not too distant future, it will be part of the rankings. So would you prefer to have data from 2022 or 2024, right? So focus on where the incentive structures are for you and your organization. It's going to be a thing you have to do.
Yeah, so be prepared, because we're all going to be doing that. I don't know if Hazel is yours. Sorry, we couldn't hear from Hazel, but we're very lucky at Aberdeen because we will get to hear a lot more from Hazel in her role. But I just wanted to better wrap up now. This has been, and just say thank you ever so much to our panel of speakers today. It's been really great to hear from you all, some great insights and a call to action at the end as well. And just to say, this isn't going to be the end of the conversation. There's plenty of things that we can get involved in. There's been lots of questions that's come through. I'm sure we can engage on Twitter and through various channels after. Lots of our speakers have said they're happy to be contacted as well. So thank you ever so much. I do also want to give a shout out to the open research team here at the University of Aberdeen for all the work they've put into this. So that's Emma, Nat, Joanne, Sarah, Leslie, and our intern Janine. Thank you so much for putting on the event today. This is the final event that we're putting on for International Open Access Week here at the University of Aberdeen. But if you do work with us here at Aberdeen, then we have got a number of events that we've got. It's just the beginning. We're not just having this week and then not talking about open research, open data, open access, research culture. There's plenty of things to come along too. So we've just got that up on the slide. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. It's been really great to have the questions from the audience and see so many people engaging with the conversation. So I hope you all have a happy Friday and an excellent weekend. So take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.